Very happy to have Clare Farrell with us. Claire is a designer and co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, devoting energy, creativity, and occasionally personal liberty to the fight against climate and environmental breakdown. You can say about Extinction Rebellion what you want, but one thing is clear: they have a tremendous amount of style, and that's in large part due to Claire, who coordinated the creative team that delivered the name, the message, and the identity that Extinction Rebellion set out with in 2018. Claire is currently a strategist at Absurd Intelligence, building a network of interdisciplinary experts to create a mass culture and arts movement that unites us in the desire for a better world. And she's also involved with the Humanity Project, working on a new democratic culture in the UK to face the 21st century. I'm very happy to have you, Claire. Please take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through a lot of things very quickly. I'm going to hang around. I'm going to have dinner with everybody tonight. So I'm talk about stuff that people want to talk about. And also, just last time we were together, someone gave me a very hard time about Extinction Rebellion. And that's okay if you want to do that too. Now, my background is fashion. So I'm not an academic, and I don't probably have any right to stray all over everybody else's territory the way that I do. But just so you understand the sort of lineage of my journey, I have gone from designing and working in sustainable fashion, which is two words that you can put together but mean absolutely fuck all. And I ended up making an art project, which was really about using the body as a vehicle for expression and positivity and resistance. This was something which naturally sort of became some of the backbone of the creative work for Extinction Rebellion. And on the way around 2017 or 16 maybe, I met somebody called Roger Hallam, who's quite a notorious troublemaker, and we started doing civil disobedience together and testing out tactics. He was doing PhD research at the time at King's College about how to make effective campaign strategies, particularly non-violence and revolutionary theory. And when I saw him on hunger strike, I thought that's exactly what everyone should be doing. Why isn't everybody doing something like that? So we started iterating. We did an air pollution campaign. I tried to get sent to prison on purpose. We went on, I didn't get sent to prison at that time. I went on hunger strike for 2 weeks over the expansion of Heathrow Airport, which was very interesting because hunger striking is a way of learning quite a lot about yourself as well as society. We lost that very badly, but then within 6 months of that, we were launching XR, and we had this mantra at the beginning, which I think we found this on some sort of anarchist pamphlet or something, that we loved this sentiment: when hope dies, action begins. And the idea that the situation is fucking hopeless, that nobody has a plan, it's extraordinarily complicated, and a lot of shit is against you. That's what we could say from this morning. And that you have to get off your ass and do something as if no one's coming to save you. So that's what we did. And miraculously, it sort of turned into this whirlwind, which changed my life in a way which I wasn't expecting. But as a designer, I can tell you that a bunch of the stuff that we made is really important. So we made a visual identity that we gave away as the antithesis of branding. You don't hoard your creative assets, you fucking give them away very quickly and design them so everyone can use them. And within months, we had a global movement that looked and felt the same, even though I couldn't read all the banners. We also made this declaration, which was a kind of, it was a design job in itself, in a way. Like, the design of the language is it's rooted in a historic, sort of quite British political tradition of saying, you know, we can see where we are and we are determined to stand up for the earth and for the future generations. We embedded a lot of the work that I'd been doing through that body politic project into it, including a focus on certain language, which is actually quite important. It's still very important to my work, which is about what I'm now calling, because I'm like a sort of spiritual idiot, the non-material life. And I think in addition to what Julia talked about this morning about how we have to move towards people's material needs, she also named people's non-material needs, which is your life sucks, you feel like shit, you have no friends, you're lonely, your career is shit, you do something every day that you don't like. That's not just a thing that you do, but it's a thing that you feel bad inside here and inside here. We are human beings. We're made up of heads and hearts. People have known this for a very long time. but we deny it in our sort of conversations about scientific, rational, material, secular, Western fuckedness that we are in. We made all these print things, which could be 3D printed or carved out of materials so that people can make their own stuff. So it's very important. You can't buy merchandise for Extinction Rebellion because you can only make it yourself, and you can only make it yourself with other people. And so that also becomes important because it's not about DIY, it's about this doing things together. And that again is sort of trying to make an action-based movement that also has an action-based merchandise and art department, if you like. And we became kind of famous for the pink boat in Oxford Circus, or for shutting down spaces in central London with these kind of audacious vision-making, setting-changing actions. And for me, this comes from a lineage of situationism and being interested in how you can actually just take over spaces and turn them into different types of spaces, which I think is also fundamentally important, that we allow people, particularly capital, particularly businesses, but even universities, to very much dictate the kind of experience we have in life by the places that we are and whether we allow those places to remain the same. Now, this is a very gorgeous bit of choreography by the Metropolitan Police, which resulted in them, issuing sections on people and starting to arrest them. But this was really the turning point, because in the UK at this time, we had great conditions for this kind of work. We used to say, some people said it was a playground for civil disobedience, because you could do this stuff and it had very, very low implications. So I could sit in the road, I could glue myself to something, I could chain myself somewhere, and I would be seen in court as someone who'd done something, as a person of conscience, not really that impactful to the general population, certainly didn't harm anyone. So you were viewed as a very low level threat. And basically you got told, well, you're obviously a nice person, we'll give you a very soft treatment. And that did not last. But I'll go on to that. The global movement expands, and the story of this really, explodes into other sectors. It's quite important that it sort of flourished in, these are the fashion protesters. They obviously made the best looking demonstrations, apart from the medics, who also made some of the best looking and the most powerfully communicative actions. So when you take the climate problem into the health context, you have a very credible set of messengers that people believe, that people trust with their lives. And you see how this plays out, the sort of merging of medics or lawyers or teachers, various different types of people who ended up in the struggle very visibly, was really helpful. And then we broke the windows of a lot of banks. I did that too. That was an action I was on. And we did that to highlight the amount of investment that they've made into fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement, which in HSBC's case was £80 billion, a lot less than JP Morgan, for example, who probably, I think, could put 3 times that or so. Groups of women dressed in, carrying tools that were painted in suffragette colours, so referencing our sort of ancestors going out and doing that, and then facing prison sentences potentially for it. So this is an escalation strategy in terms of non-violence, direct action, and being willing to pay a huge personal cost, potentially, in order to get your point made, which is the inequality in the legal system. Little people can participate, but it costs you a fuck of a lot more than it costs somebody who's rich or a corporation as an entity. Along this journey, I learned, as Julia talked about the Atlas think tank network, and a lot of them are in London, based out of this building on Tufton Street, but not all of them. And when you start to learn about this kind of lobbying by other means, which is going on really, the influence campaigns that go through fucking primary schools right through to boardrooms, it is impossible to look away from the structural problem that you actually have to face this, which most people don't know exists. And most people don't understand. And actually, I've found if you explain it in detail to some people, they don't actually believe you, because it sounds like such an obscene conspiracy theory that people would really engineer this much effort and money and influence and intelligence against people being able to survive It feels unfathomable, but it is real. So this is an action that we did. We spray painted the pillars. There were a lot of writers there. It was a really beautiful action. Actually, we closed Tufton Street for a whole day and had lots of novelists and beautiful writers giving their speeches. And one of the reasons why we were there was because of this paper. Now, Policy Exchange is one of the think tanks in the Atlas network. And these two people, one of whom is a disgraced police officer who left the force before he was properly investigated for an iconic case in Britain where the police treated a murdered child's family like absolute shit. This paper was released with no scrutiny about who paid for it. In fact, nobody still knows who paid for it. But it is certainly contains the inspiring sort of backbone of all of our new public order laws that we have in Britain that basically mean you can't do any effective disruptive protest at all because you will face prison sentence and probably a lot worse. And I was named in this paper because the co-founders of Exile were all named in it. So when you see yourself in their literature and they're saying really fucking weird things about you, then you really do pay attention to their strategy. But one of the things that they said was, if you see that subtext, Extinction Rebellion has mainstreamed the politics of a radical fringe, right? The key word there is mainstream. So we know, because we built the art department and put the book together that went out published by Penguin, that when it was at its peak, Extinction Rebellion was mainstream. It wasn't weird. It wasn't a bunch of crusties with, you know, spanners in a field. It was people in a city centre taking over the whole place and making it impossible for the mainstream media to ignore, making it impossible for the government to ignore. We were on their front lawn. And there was thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and all they were doing was sitting there and saying, I think it's really bad too, I'm here too. There were kids, grandmas. It was a very diverse movement actually at the beginning. And really it is impossible, I think, to lose on a solid strategy of non-violent escalation if you are ostensibly right, which we are, about the situation, and you've got all of those people on board and it's popular. So people now will say, oh, we hate people like you, Claire, because you like get in people's way and you piss people off. But that campaign in the media for the last sort of 4 years has also definitely been backed by this think tank space in terms of destroying my identity so that you can hate me instead of being annoyed about the problem that I'm trying to present. And a lot of this stuff you can see, I felt, began around me reading this paper and understanding that I'm implicated by it. So fast forward to 2023, and on the public record, you have Rishi Sunak saying, thank you, Policy Exchange, for helping write our laws. So it's not my intuition that says that paper seeded those ideas. Policy Exchange actually helped to draft the legislation, and several people in the top of political office in Britain have admitted that in public on camera. So it's not me being a weird conspiracy theorist. This is really what's going on. And that means that you have to ask a question not only about what's happened, but about sovereignty itself, because nobody knows where the money comes from. And these companies are transnational corporations, and the industries themselves are international industries. So if they're lobbying for public order legislation in order to crush non-violent movements that are doing what actually the public agree with, then you don't actually have the right to write your own laws because corporations are writing your fucking laws. So this is quite a serious issue. Now we're working in the sort of context, I would say, with what we call the multifaceted intersecting shit show. This is just a visual representation of that. All of the problems that we've got, often called the polycrisis, metacrisis, or whatever the words, I think shit show is more helpful because people understand it better. And when you are looking at a systemic problem and you try to think about a systemic response, obviously it's complicated. And you might say, well, we can do something in the law because we know how to do that. We could do something in the media because we think we know that terrain. We could do something. What we said, because we're sort of idiots who think that we should try and think about things in a really big systemic way and do something weird, is that we said, what if we tried to do something that change the story. And everyone keeps on kind of going, oh, we need a new story to live by, or we need a new story, as if someone needs to sit down and write a story and then go, oh, here you go, this is better. We can just live according to this. And of course, that doesn't really work. But what we thought actually was that we needed a more ecosystemic approach that would say organizing, advocacy, culture, and communications, which is probably one of the only bits of our strategy that rests on some academic work that says this is what we think works in terms of the combination of elements. But it feels important to me to say that based on that, we've come forward to say we want to create this mass movement to be able to support us all to have a more emotionally mature public discourse life together and to create a new democratic reality. And one of the things that Policy Exchange didn't like about XR was that we did want a different political system. And they saw, better than the progressive left, that we actually were advocating to systemically change the way that we do politics, not to just have a socialist leader, not just to have a different party, but to have an entirely different mode of engagement with the population that leads to a different nature of political life, I suppose. And they were really on it because that was what we meant. And most people didn't really take that part terribly seriously. But we are trying to push towards a more bottom-up democracy. And so we started this think tank, Absurd Intelligence, based on kind of being inspired by those people and thinking, well, you know, fuck me. If they can do that, and it's literally against everyone's interests and nobody wants it to take place, and they've created such a scale of infrastructure of influence and control, we've got some work to do because all our think tanks are worthy, academic, quite boring, definitely not trying to take over the world in the same way. They're just saying we do policy and that's more sensible, which is like, you know, not pushing us very far. So we decided to start a think tank kind of so that we could do whatever we like, not because we want to write policy. But we have this kind of view of an intersection of things. So if you look at the big circles there, there's society, imagination, and technology. We've kind of tried to look at how we do democratic and ritual and intentional needs, how we find spiritual and non-material needs, and how we look at material needs, the economic. There's overlap between all this stuff, but we're trying to sort of take a big view of how you might think about actually making a world that's totally different to the one that we have. And at the centre of it is this piece about belonging, which is very key in the UK. We've done a bunch of different things in order to try and create an ecosystem that can help us drive this stuff forwards, and where, importantly, you don't have to do all the work yourself, because the genius of the neoliberal paradigm is that it runs itself, it repairs itself. It's like one of those robot dogs. It just, like, you know, you knock it over and it just gets up and just carries on. And that seems to be part of the design. So we have to design something that's like better than that, which is quite challenging, but it also means it's not all on any of us. So that should feel good somehow. So we invited a bunch of artists to hang out at Brian Eno's studio. Brian has been very kind to us. And now we have this kind of network of influential creative people called Hard Art. They're very cool. And with them, a couple of years ago, we took over this big cultural venue in Manchester in the north of England. And we put on a thing we called the Fate of Britain, which is like a festival in a way to include things you would want to go to, like music and comedy, with things that lots of people would probably not sign up for, like a workshop on participatory democracy. And to try and sort of create a cultural invitation to go and experience what it might be like if we ran the country ourselves in a way that we actually like. And lots of people came and said, oh, actually, I thought this was going to be really miserable and people talking about lots of problems, but it was actually fun. So from that, we've kind of taken that model, and in a kind of XR way, in a way, we've thought, right, to go down to the grassroots and do it in a small scale. So we've done it in small places, community centres, gigs with in a collaboration with Rough Trade. And we're testing out, basically we've been like beta testing this stuff for like 3 years. How can we create environments where people experience what this different world could be like, and also get some access to information about what it's made of, how do you do it, and make sure that it's like drowning in like culture and beauty and fun and joy and creativity and love. And it's a reckoning with national identity, because I don't know what's happening everywhere else, because I'm not everywhere else, but I have a feeling that everyone's having similar experience to the one we're having in Britain, where there is a racially contested, horrendous shit show going on in politics, which is about who belongs and who doesn't, and what does it mean to be from a country or not. And if you live in a place that basically raped and pillaged the world, like Britain, and is a very, very diverse and multicultural 21st century society, you really need a story about who we are together, which is not what the far right are pushing. And on our terms, the progressive space in Britain is very much lacking in an answer to that question. What is 21st century diverse, mature, loving Britain look like? They don't really have an answer. Some of them grab a flag and some of them run away from a flag. And that's kind of where you end up. So we're saying, look, Britain's made up of a very complicated lot of shit, but lots of it's beautiful, and lots of the best parts don't get really a look in because we talk about all the worst bits. So can we start from a constructive and positive place? And the other thing that Julia and I've spoken about before is how the right wing and the think tank space are very good at sort of incubating people. They nurture people. They focus on individuals. They focus on talent, and they lift up voices. And the left and the progressive space don't like that, because they say, don't be so self-important. And we've got a movement, don't you know? We shouldn't just listen to that one person all the time. But the problem is people have relationships with people. They don't have relationships with institutions and organizations and movements. So you do actually have to have some people who get helped to represent the news stories, whether we like it or not. So we set up this think tank sort of inspired speakers agency. It's a concept, but it's kind of a means to supporting a network of people who can be the voices, who can sort of say the news story into the world. And it's a mixture of artists and activists and scientists and various other people so far. But this is just a sort of testing, can we gather these people together and help them feel supported by one another, that they can tell this new story? And so that's a bit of an experimental space right now. Speak up. Speak up. So this is one of the diagrams that we've used to describe the sort of moving from individuals to collaboration into an ecosystem. So it's just a really nice way of helping people see, as well, like you're doing here, convening people across disciplines is really important, because people are hyper specialist in their silos. They can actually become quite limited, and we do very unintelligent things when somebody who only understands economics writes the economics for climate change because they misread all the fucking science. We know that problem is serious, but also in a creative like space, it's a problem that people are sort of separated away from each other. So one of our intentions is definitely this convening across difference. And, you know, we also have done this partly assuming that we're in this moment like the Kairos, where you're sort of not beyond the old, but you're not in the new, but there's something here which is possible to change. And it feels like more and more in the recent years, this is becoming more and more true for more people, I think, that we're in this kairotic time. And there's a grassroots element to the strategy, which is not coming out of the think tank, but where we've been saying, what if power, which is usually named after men doing certain things in the world, what if that analysis of power is actually shit, based on people that were unhelpful, and that we need a new sense of what that is? And if we reimagine that, is the next thing going to be the power of the neighbour, and the unit of power being seen to be the power of the neighbourhood? And it's something that I think is very clear to me from speaking to people in the UK, there's a real interest in the strategic sort of going to a place-based way of working. So it might be good that I know loads about climate and that I know loads of people all over the world who know loads about climate. But if I don't know anyone on my street, I'm still really weak, actually. And this is becoming sort of very obvious, I think, to a lot of people. So there's a humanity project element to this ecosystem, which is trying to encourage the kind of praxis, if you like, of what we're calling assembly culture. So people convening themselves on a local level in order to deal with the shit that's in front of them, and to do it using the inspiration that we've learned from deliberative politics, which basically means you get people together and they listen to each other. And the key thing, what Julia talked about, that guy who goes into the assembly and says, I'm a climate denier or I'm a climate skeptic and I'm not going to fucking listen, I'm not going to be fooled by any of you, thank you very much, that they actually sit down and get listened to for enough hours that they can reach a point where they're talking with their peers and they go, oh, actually, maybe I'm wrong. And some of the other people might say, oh, actually, when you walked in wearing that MAGA hat, I just thought you were an asshole. But actually now I actually quite like you. You know, I disagree with you about some things, but I kind of like you as well. Because it's not about a politics of argument and debate and fighting. It's about a politics of deliberation. And the key is that people talk and they're listened to. So one of the things we've rested on with this is the right to be heard. Not freedom of speech, but the right to be listened to, which is not the same thing, because if I'm famous, I've got the right to shout my mouth off and everyone will hear it because the newspapers will publish it. But most of us don't have the right to be listened to at all. So you can say what you like as long as no one's listening. And that's what these public order laws are about, is about saying we believe in the right to protest, which is why we're making sure that you do it quietly. So everyone can do it as much as they like and nobody will notice. And then everyone will be happy, you know? So the point is being heard, being listened to, and it's a transformative thing, partly for people to learn to speak, because most people don't also get taught how to speak, because we assume that poor people shouldn't run anything. So basically in the UK, we have this sort of very tiered education system. And I went to normal school. No one taught me how to fucking speak. Probably why I speak like this, but it's true, you know. And so an empowered, agency fueled community requires for people to know how to speak and how to listen, and it requires for people to be able to tolerate difference, which actually they can, but the newspapers tell us that we can't, but people really can. So this is kind of the on the ground practice of this, and it's very slow work. So it's not like starting XR. It's been like I've been working on it for 3 years, and one of the partners has just done an assembly last weekend, which was an enormous success. But it's been a long journey of like getting people to believe in it, to think about it, to train in some of it, and to genuinely create the sort of desire to do it. Now I put a video in here, but I don't actually think I want to show it. So I wonder if I can skip past it.
I think that
I'll send it out and you can watch it another time. Just to finish, what we've done with all of these sort of bits, which sounds quite chaotic, and it is last year in September, we organised a convention, because I thought, actually, why don't we put an event? We're good at convening. We'll put an event on the calendar, kind of around the time when political parties have their things. And we'll say, you know, the people who think that parties are weird, because they are, and that the party system is not what we need anyway, that we need to move beyond that we need a political space of our own, which is kind of a convention for community organisers and a convention for people who think that we should have a total system rethink where we involve everybody. So we organise this convention. We're going to do another one this year. And that's a sort of growing like conception in my head of how we can create a story also that says, you know, we don't just have like warring parties, but we have like the general public are the biggest majority in Britain who don't agree with any party and who want a systemic change. Like the bigger demographic at the British elections, last election, was people who thought the system's shit, not the people who voted for anybody. So in theory, there's quite a lot of people who could come into that space. we have been developing this constructive program concept as a sort of visible strand of research, which I've been doing on Substack. So really asking for the support from the spiritual community, first of all, to say, what should we do? And inspired by Gandhi's constructive program, you know, if we need to build new industry, new community, new spirituality, education, all the things, you think about the sort of multifaceted sort of approach that was in that piece of work for Gandhi. I feel like from where I've come, from resistance and obstruction and civil disobedience, non-violence, all of that is important, but there's a constructive need for us to build the new world. And actually the old one's going to destroy itself, patently clear. So if we don't win in changing it massively, then we're going to have to build some shit out of the ruins. So let's get good at building the new stuff. And at least then that pulls in a different type of person, I think, who's involved in a different type of work. And this is the trifle. That's the revolutionary trifle. So we're convening people in physical space, and we're convening people around better stories. We're also making sure that we're interested in bottom up, and we're also connecting with people and top down. And so we're trying to sort of hold the complexity of doing all of this work with a view that there's nothing else very interesting to do apart from trying to build alternative reality for ourselves. And certainly for me, the idea about stories and story making and living a different story and having a different story is important to understand, that you don't get a new story by thinking it up. You have to get a new story by people enacting it. And so it goes right back to the beginning where I was saying, actually, I'm interested in the embodiment of communication and the embodiment of a message. People have to like live and experience this stuff in order to go, oh, there is that other story available. Not because somebody told it into my head or opened it up and put it in there, but because I did a thing and now I realize that actually I can be a different person in relationship with you, you and you, because we actually make the world together. And as David Graeber said, we could just as easily make it completely differently. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Claire, for an incredibly inspiring talk. Any questions?
Yeah, so first off, thanks for coming, and also thanks for starting it off, because it gave me hope. Just after I first learned about climate change and I was ready to rage and storm the streets, and it was at exactly that point that XR picked and I could rage and storm the streets. I think what I wanted to ask is, like, XR's kind of been killed a bit with the, you know, you can't stand on the street or you'll be arrested and thrown in jail. And I feel like that's left a real gap. And it's left me going, well, what do I do now when I want to rage and storm the streets? And I don't, like, there isn't that kind of mechanism to do it anymore. And almost to the point where I've now gone, well, I'm riled up now, but like to the point where I've been numb for so long, because it's like climate change is bad and I feel like I'm doing everything that I can about it, but it still doesn't feel enough. And it feels insurmountable, and it feels like that I can't do any more, but I don't feel like I'm as effective as I could be. So when do I get to rage and storm the streets again?
Oh, love, I don't know. I think part of the challenge for this is that the people, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years with people who are like running food banks and stuff like that, and community centres, and trying to help people to do that type of work is such a different energy and is such a different reward than going out and feeling like you've really like given everything and you've done your sort of like moment of sort of power giving, to that sort of power breaking work. And I sort of think that in some ways doing this sort of bigger ecosystemic strategic thinking is allowing different types of people to become part of this sort of push At the same time, it's leaving out a lot of the energy that's been like totally suppressed. And I don't know what the answer is, apart from to sort of get some friends and elders around you, because for me the eldership in the movement is quite strong if you can find them. And I think you'll find quite a lot of people from the older peace movement, the Greenham Common women, the anti-nuclear women, there's lots of people in our space who've been through that. The movement sort of map, Bill Moyer, if you've seen it, it's like this, and it's painful to ride it because it goes down and you have this moment where you feel like, oh God, we've completely lost. At the point, by the way, where you've completely won the argument and everybody agrees with you and you're in the ditch crying and the world is going, well, we obviously need to change that, and you're like going, oh God, it's never going to work. So I think the elders can help you, because also, I mean, we don't have any time, but the suffragettes would also say, babes, it took us 30 years. Who do you think you are? Do you know what I mean? So I think older people can support us through it. But also, I don't know, like meditate and go and work in a food bank.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. For context, I've lived in the UK for about a decade. And so maybe this will be a bit of a pushback, but I'm sure you've been asked this question in one format or the other before, and I just want to hear what your thoughts are. So you already referred to different ways of engaging with people, kind of involving them a bit more, and also saying like we don't need to just obstruct, we also need to construct. And so hearing people more, like creating these spaces. I will say, like you kind of mentioned that Exile was a diverse movement and stuff, but I do want to push back on that and say I don't think it's completely diverse. I think a lot of people don't identify with the movement. People who care about climate, they see it as a bit more maybe scary or like maybe not my place. Oh, I don't want to be like out there protesting. I don't want to like disrupt people's lives. Like I don't really identify with that, but I care about the climate. And I feel like from anecdotally from having spoken to people over the years living in the UK, it's like I understand what they're doing. I support it. I care about the climate, but like I don't like that way of doing it. So what's your take on that? Like, do you feel like maybe you're being unintentionally a bit exclusionary with this type of movement? Like, can you take a bit of a critical approach? What would be your comments on that, basically?
Well, if you think that functionally getting loads of people arrested is going to work, then it's a somewhat exclusionary approach. And you can't make that inclusive, like more than it is. And actually some academics researched XR in the first year or two, and they did find just on race demographics, for example, that the ratio of people that were not white who were arrested for XR in the first year was quite close to the actual percentage of non-white people in the UK. Literally, it was like 1% away or something. It was very close. What I found from running the media team was that those people didn't want to be public. They didn't want to put their stories in the world. They didn't want to be spokespeople. They didn't want to get seen by their community necessarily. So it was very difficult to visibilize that. So there is an additional problem for the movement, which is not the movement's fault, which is a contextual problem, which is that actually some people want to do this stuff, but they, I know one guy, he's like, my Nigerian family would go fucking nuts, basically. For example, right, I'm just saying one example of a cultural kind of challenge that young person faced with the older people in his family or community. So that was one problem, was we couldn't show often the diversity that was there. Also, I think there's a sort of sense that everybody was very privileged or very middle class.
Yes.
Everybody is mostly university educated. Not everyone, but mostly. Everyone who threw that criticism at us was university educated. I don't know any other parts of the climate space who have been successful in mobilizing the poorest areas of the working class to come out and fight for the climate. There's obvious reasons why people don't spend their like tiny amount of spare time when they're living in poverty going out on a march and potentially getting arrested. And in some senses, the arguments that came up, which Julia spoke to really well, not to pit the sort of environmental against the social, that's really a kind of work in progress, I think. It's like totally ongoing all the time. Some spaces tried really hard to address it, like the Health for XR space started out as Doctors for XR. And basically they had doctors, but they had no fucking nurses, right? So you see it replicate itself over and over and over again. In a way, you know, me spending 3 years going around with people in the Cost of Living Alliance and working especially in Humanity Project, there's 3 of us leading from different spaces. So there's me, I'm the climate person. There's also a race and inequalities person. There's also a cost of living person. And we've all got a sort of network behind us of connected people who are organized on those issues. And we're trying to show up together as a response partly to that critique to say, actually, if we all work together and people see us working together, then they'll realize a bit more that their movements are connected, but not because we sat them down and told them theoretically why they're connected, but because we showed ourselves working together. So I think that's also the challenge of being a single issue thing, which is for an abstraction like climate. I just also want to say something interesting was we got critiqued a lot for having a message that says, I'm here for my grandchildren, right? Some people said, for your white grandchildren, huh? Like this, right? I was like, oh God, you know, like actually these like poor crying people lying in the road saying, I'm so heartbroken for like the fate of humanity. And someone's got a university critical laptop typing position about them saying, well, who do you think you are, granny? You know, that I found really challenging because the other critique was you don't really have a stake in it because you're not from the global south, so you don't have credibility. So if a grandma can't have intergenerational credibility because she cares about her grandkids, but then you also can't have credibility because you're in Britain. And then you also can't have credibility because you have a degree. And you also can't have credibility because you're white and you live in London. Or, you know, I mean, all of these things came at us and it felt to me very challenging because whilst we wanted to sort of engage with some of these things, and I don't think we did always engage with them well, and it's a distributed movement. So lots of working groups and local groups dealt with these things better or worse, depending where they were. It did feel a lot to me like it was a reaction from people who were not willing to make the sacrifices the movement was making. And so they wanted to put down the people who were willing to do it. I do think that goes on a personal basis. I think some of the left who threw endless criticism at our movement basically were like, I'm not fucking doing that. But I do feel like a bit of a coward for not doing it. So I'm going to give you a lot of intellectual reasons why you're not doing it right. And if you were doing it right, I'd come and do it with you, but I'm not doing it because I have a nice life and I like going to America, thank you. And so, for example, you know, Roger Hallam, who went to the World Transformed conference, I don't know if you saw Ash Sarkar's been kind of dining out on this story because he went to the convention and basically called them all cunts. And he did it on purpose because that whole kind of left space in the UK was constantly like going, you this, you that, you that. But meanwhile, refusing to talk to the movement. And I thought it was really interesting because now Ash has written a book about moving away from identity politics and how organizing around identity on its own is actually keeping people too much apart. It's at odds with that sort of place-based thing about mixing everybody up in a geographic way. And I think it's fascinating to me how this sort of conversation has sort of moved and grown basically towards more and more people coming together. But I think what is very clear to me is that a lot of people who want it to be up here saw a movement that came out and said, we're like here. And they also find that a total affront because they're like, but you can't act from here because we do everything up here. Don't you understand? That's not our culture. Yeah. And I think XR was very at odds with people's kind of cultural position in saying, I'm here for my grandchildren, I'm heartbroken, you can put me in prison, you know, or insert whatever kind of heartfelt sentiment here. It was kind of like, you know, that's that's not okay because we want to rationalize our way out of this problem. And so I sort of feel like the sides are moving closer together now. So the criticism like that is kind of softening, and the movement has gone a bit softer anyway because it's been fucking bashed. So now everyone's a bit more like, oh, maybe we're kind of more in the same boat, and maybe we're kind of seeing the issues the same. Maybe we're kind of seeing ourselves, we could work together. So I hope that's where it's in a positive way going.
That was amazing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so let's run slightly over. Maybe we can have quick questions and slightly
Shorter answers.
It's heartbreaking, but just eloquent. Yes.
Thank you so much for this really exciting talk. I was wondering whether you were talking about, I think in Germany, actually, the movement does quite a chunk about like color perspectives and about like having, right now, you said it is yourself, like the current world is like destroying itself somehow. I mean, all that, you see that? So what is your opinion on that? Like having that perspective, like structural problems, is it not? I can just speak for my perspective. Actually, for me, it gives me hope again somehow, and it enables me a bit more. And actually, I think it also fits in with that. So with community work and neighborhood, is it particularly your perspective?
Are you talking about Collapse Camp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Referring to that.
Because somebody was supposed to come to that thing in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am aware of that. And actually at that meetup in Leida, there was definitely a sense for me amongst the academics there that they were sort of going, yeah, but what if we've just totally lost? And then some of them going, I don't think we've totally lost. And then another one going, but what if we already have, which is possible? They're like, well, yeah, I guess it is possible. Okay, well, it's a reckoning with it, you know? And I suppose that's why we started XR with that hope dies, action begins, because we were like, we are monumentally fucked. It looks like there's almost nothing to be done. Therefore, do whatever you feel like. Do something really audacious, do something really big, do something really exciting, because it actually doesn't really matter, because you can't be smart and incremental. So it's just gone. So you just clear the decks. And I think there's a challenge for people who've swallowed all of that sort of what I think is not totally correct psychology, which says people will go like in a hole in the sand and hide and stop, and everybody would get too scared and nothing good will happen if you scare the shit out of people, because if you look at the reality, it's really scary. So that you can't not scare the shit out of people because it's shit scary. So then if you do that, then you have to have something reasonable to do. Otherwise you will fall into despair. But it's like, it's okay if you've got something to do and some people to do it with. You can go and do something that makes you cope. If you just tell someone it's really fucking bad and then go, sorry about that, and walk off, then they fall to pieces. But it's the detachment between information and action and feelings that I think is the problem. So the collapse thing, I think, is completely helpful. As I've seen it, collapse people are much more productive than not collapse people often. But it gets painted as a sort of doom, you're all going to turn into nihilists kind of thing. And it's not been my experience. I'm sure some people do it, but my experience has been like quite productive space. But it has to be held in a generative, like positive, let's do cool shit together because nothing matters anymore kind of way. Then you can turn yourself into a bit of a sort of superpower from it, I think.
I think short. Claire, you mentioned the challenge of communicating the scale of the challenge and the scale of the conspiracy because it makes you sound like a shady person. And you also mentioned that medics, for example, or healthcare workers in general, people trust them, so people maybe they have a little more effect in communicating these things. My impression from India and a small time in the UK is that academics do not have that position in society anymore, if they ever did. Do you have a sense of what's the right demographic to be doing the talking? Who are people listening to? Who do they trust? Who should be doing the talking?
Medics. I mean, in Britain, people, I can't remember what it's all fuckers, isn't it? Like the PR industry do that trust index, but the people who make it are the worst people on earth. But the trust index that says people hate politicians, people don't trust the media, they don't trust journalists, they don't trust. Really, like I think the top of that is nurses, basically. Probably some teachers, probably there's some bits of stuff, but institutionally, I think it's that. I feel that there's also something about faith communities that we often overlook in the West because we are, unlike the rest of the world, we have kind of killed God. And it's quite normal for people in my country to think that it's nice for you to believe what you believe, but like, obviously it's not real. So that's what we think, you know? And it's the rest of the world does not work like that actually at all. And there are faith communities that are really well structured in a way to understand that they're together out of a sense of community and care, and that you then have these information sharing network potentials where you've got like one person who gets listened to by a lot of people. That person, if they show up in a wise way on certain issues, can actually help to bring a whole community with them really well. I do think that exists in some bits in the UK as well. I'm just being facetious, but it is an issue that we've kind of denigrated some of our most trusted social sort of communicators by how we've like destroyed our own society, I think.
I think there are too many questions. Time is already advanced.
Thanks again, Claire.
Thank you.